In this video help tutorial, we're going to be discussing the purchase records and how purchase orders are created and managed. Let's first of all look at one aspect of this application, and I want to discuss about the difference between an accounting program and a front-end or custom application like the one you're viewing here. Let's take QuickBooks for an example. QuickBooks has an invoicing system. It does have an inventory system. It does have a vendor, and they marry them together. But once you start working in that application, it's more tied to a invoice, like we have here in work order invoice, and it really doesn't keep track of the way that things are put in. One of the things that is really difficult is when you're taking and going to the accounts receivable and accounts payable. When you're going to the register to look at things, they group everything together as far as what was paid at one time. Now, that presents some issues, and the issues are that you cannot really differentiate between Mr. Green, for example, here, and his ID, and also the tech work that was done individually, because these could be in one work order. As far as the tech ID is concerned, it could be one set of tasks or many tasks on one work order. And this is similar the way that QuickBooks looks at it, is an invoice can have Mr. Green in it, but it can also have many Mr. Green things without differentiating between the IDs. What that means is when I want to go back and find Mr. Green's work, I would have to look at it more on the invoice number and not on his ID or by his name. That really gets confusing when you're trying to find information about a specific client and breaking it down to the individual client and the task work order, in this case the task ID for that particular project or task that you're doing for that client. Now I'm going to stop here. I don't want to make this confusing. It can be in QuickBooks because it's very difficult to pull apart the accounts receivables and the accounts billables. What happens, what we did here, and we talked about this earlier about the closed loop inventory system, and I'll kind of describe what I'm talking about. There are three main aspects to the closed loop inventory. You have to have a client, and the client is actually, believe it or not, a sub-portion of the closed loop inventory system. You start out when you have an inventory that you have to have inventory items that that particular client is going to use in the process of this work that you're doing for them. And it's related to the work order invoice that you're doing also, because you're going to take these tasks that have to be done and you're going to create an invoice for all the items that you're actually using during that process of a work order. That might be consumables, repairables, and it might even mean that you're going to replace subcomponents within a repairable item. To make that perfectly clear, if it's not in the inventory system and you have to add parts that are coming in for this client that have not been used before, you would have to create those inventory items. That puts the demand on the application to have items purchased. Once they're purchased, they will go into the inventory and show that they're received. Once they're received, then you have the items that you have a work order for, where you actually use those items and you bill them out within the work order invoice. Now, I'm going to talk about the second portion of this. Since Mr. Green has a work order here and he's doing that, we're doing the task for that, we're bringing in inventory items, or if they're already in inventory, we can use them. And we're going to create, maybe if we have to have parts, we can put a purchase record in and use a vendor or different vendors. Now, there's where the sticking point is. What happens is if you have multiple purchase orders against this one particular task and work order that you're working, and you have an invoice where you're doing work order information on there, you might have multiple vendors and multiple purchase items that are going to be used during the process of doing that service for this client. What you need to do is differentiate between each work order, and in this particular case, you can have multiple work orders, and this is for all the work orders, or not all work orders, but the purchase orders that are used for all the purchase orders. And what that means is that this is the status and the header for the particular one that you're looking at, that you're creating as far as a purchase order is concerned. What you would do when you're creating a new purchase order. And let's go over and look at that screen. When you create a new purchase order, it's looking at the item ID as far as this client. This is related to only this client and no other ones. If you came back and Mr. Green needed another project done at a different time, and you put Mr. Green in to create a new project with new tasks, then when you look on here, that task for Mr. Green would now be whatever the next numeric number is in the service system as far as another work order being done. But if you had multiple vendors where you're buying things on purchase orders, there would have to be a unique ID for each vendor that you go to where you're creating a purchase order. Keep in mind that you're going to maybe ABC products for some of the parts that you need for Mr. Green, and you may be going to another company like XYZ company for additional things that you're going to buy, which is a individual another purchase order. So for this project, what I'm going to be seeing here, these should be any of the individual work orders by this client ID for this particular job that you're doing, the dates which it's done, and the different vendors for each individual purchase order that you're running. Now, when you're creating a purchase order and you come in there into this place, if you go in and you have a data entry that's automatically done for this particular purchase ID and the client, which is matched to this one up here, the next time you create a new purchase order, which you're doing right here, you would put the next sequential purchase order that is out there for the next item purchase. And what that means is that you need to go over here and know which is the next purchase order number. And you can go ahead and add that next number. So for example, if I'm looking at 1235 as a purchase order number, and I'm going to go ahead and do a purchase, when I create this, I'm going to have to type in the next purchase order number, which would be 1236 when I create this. Because we just looked at 35, that was the last one. They're not sequential in here, so you have to break them up. When you're doing different jobs, you can may have, I don't know how much your shop has or how many stops you make if you're mobile. You would have maybe 6 or 7 clients in a day. And each one of those, if they have a purchase order where you're creating it, could have a different PO number. Each time you use Mr. Green for this particular project, it will repeat the ID for Mr. Green, number 1, and there may be multiple purchase order numbers, and they're sequential based on the last one. The last one that's here is 35. So if that's clear or you have questions, this is a good time if you need assistance to go ahead and ask for help. Now I've added in this thing where it says go to PO records. If you're creating these and they actually fill the portal screen with all the POs, you can go to this thing that says go last, and what it'll do, first of all, you have to do this. You have to go up here and click into a record just to highlight it, and then go last like this. It'll go all the way down to the bottom one, so you can see the last PO ID that was used. In this particular case, the PO number was 1235. It could be 2010 if there's that many of them in there. And the next one, that's the blank space for the next one, would be the next number you would use in the next purchase order that you're creating. Okay, so now that we've established how we use the different records, we've created an inventory item if we needed it for this particular task, if it was not already in the inventory system. We are picking a vendor to do a purchase if we have to buy materials, but we do that in the purchase order itself when we're doing that. And then we create a purchase order by going to the purchase order. We create the next one. We put the date. We pick the vendor we're going to be going to. You do not have to do any of this stuff here. You could change the status if you wanted to and create a different status, but we'll do that in the actual purchase order itself. The numeric numbers down here are actually on the PO order. So let's go over there to the PO order and look at that. This is the PO order. Once again, you have the purchase ID, you have Mr. Green, and you have the purchase order ID number that you created in the record we just did. Now this one is obviously already done and it has information in it, but you would come to this screen and it would basically be fairly blank except for the stuff that you added in that purchase order record. You could put in the next ID was done already, the date is already done, and in here you can pick whatever the vendor is that you want to use for this particular purchase order. These numbers will be blank, and the status when you come up here is depending upon what you have to put in there. Now, if you do not see something that you need to do in this particular work order design, what you do is you click the edit and you add that in there. Pursuant to the kind of business that you have and the way you do things, it's almost certain that you add stuff to this list. And you can move them around in whatever order you want to as far as building the order of the way you want to look at them when they come up in the drop-down list. So for example, I have an RMA, a return material action that's going on here, and it's a RMA is pending. In other words, we sent either broken or damaged items that were shipped to us back, or maybe something was missing, like we didn't have the right quantity when the guy sent us something from the same vendor. We bought both these items from this vendor, and if you got the shipment and it was not received, you may have to contact the vendor to start an RMA for missing items, especially if they were supposed to be, say like there were supposed to be 6 of them and you receive 5, and you have one balance that you need, like this one says one balance as far as the balance due. In this particular case, if there were, let's go over here, there were 3 ordered and they delivered 2 and there was 1 missing, that would create an RMA action. So you would have to have an RMA request. On this purchase order, you have 1 outstanding item that you need to have collected from the vendor. You would contact them, make notes about this particular purchase order and PO notes that you were missing something. And what was the action? Contacted the vendor. The vendor said he would ship it the next day overnight. So you would have that item that was missing in the shipment. Now, it's not unusual when you have a lot of items in one purchase order that you have some things that didn't get back to you as far as receipt of. And if you don't get those items back, then you have to use an RMA in order to identify where they're going to get your products from. Now, in this case, if you look at this, this is a purchase thing, and I didn't have all the items in there I wanted. I just created a thing that said labor, and I was using that. Obviously, if you're purchasing items, labor is not something you purchase, so I just want to make that clear. In this case, this is a legitimate one. For example, when I look at all the items, I only had a few on there, so I use this one. Outside items and labor are really charged to the work order, not to the purchase order. And I just wanted to have one item that I could show and show the numerics for it. Now, let's go down through the lines. The first thing you want to do when you create a purchase order is to put in the date for that purchase order, which is applicable to the time that you actually called in the order. Now, if I came back and I made a new order with additional items, create another purchase order, and then actually would be changing this 1233 to the next accessible number that was in the keys. Like go up here and you look, this shows you the last one that was going to be created. This is the last one, and then you would pick the next number. You would go back to the data screen, go to the purchase thing, and create another new purchase order. Is that clear? I hope. Okay, so we know what we're doing up here in all the data, and we know that we have PO numbers so we can find the last one, which is, if we needed to go to the next one, we know what that number is going to be when we go to create a new purchase order. Now, obviously, this is still available in the data screen, in the purchase screen, to find the next accessible number. I just want to be able to have that in here too, to look it up. Now, once you have created the date of the order date, and obviously order date is the day you go in, and you already have the part ID information, when you create or drop this down, it'll automatically fill this. It'll automatically fill the standard cost. Standard cost needs to be added in where? The inventory screen. So you have to have the inventory available or you can't order it. So you may have to go back and put in the inventory item that you need to purchase if it's not in your inventory system, or you don't have current inventory on hand to satisfy the need for this particular item. Now, this is not editable. You can see you cannot click on it. You have to go to the inventory itself and look up this item in order to change this particular thing. Now, you don't normally change this. What you would do is if you want to order something, you can go into the part cost here and say it's a different cost for some reason. And you're going to need to put the part cost in here as far as what you're going to be ordering. Part cost being what you're going to pay for it. This was the standard cost that we normally pay for it. Now, when you do a multiple, if you put in 3, obviously it's going to take the math. 3 times 21, and then it should be the amount. In this case, if it's part cost that you're paying for it, in this case was $39 or $35.90, then it would be $107.70, which is at the 3 times $35.99. It's not this number. It's whatever you actually are having to pay for it. Now, when you go to the vendor and you're doing your order, you verify, is it $21 I'm paying for this today? Or what is the price? And if it's a cost, I should say, if it's the cost of $35.90, you may want to come up and take a note that the standard cost was changed because this particular vendor is maybe the only one you can get it from, and he's raised his price. There's other situations. It may be lower than the standard price. Now, what's going to happen over time, you want to average that individual price. So if it's $35.90 now and it was $21, you could take the amount that it should be on an average by how many you're going to buy or when the last time you bought it, and put an average price in here as opposed to the price that is over here. Now, this can be changed over time. I'm saying this is what I'm actually purchasing it at for this item on this row, and it's $35.90 when I go to the vendor this day. I could have got it for $21. I may want to check with other vendors if they're available, but if this is the only one, I'm stuck with the $35.90 if I need that part. Then you have a status. Is this a quote or is it an order? If it's a quote and you just did the quote at the vendor, you may want to go look at some other vendors and just leave this in here as far as this vendor's quote. In this particular case, it's ABC Products. If this is all quotes and you're still doing the PO number, it's not going to change anything as far as this particular purchase order is concerned. Then you would still leave it as 1233. You've already created it, because this can change from a quote to an order anytime. And that's why you put in quotes and orders in here. So say, for example, you receive this as a quote. And what I did when I triggered this and I changed it, what it did is it changed the price as well, because when you do a quote, it's going to nullify this until it becomes an actual order. You'll see now that the row total, even though it's 3 times 35, by making this a quote, it's going to carry over 00, and you should not have any received at this time, so you'd back off the 2 as far as the item quantity received. So in this is a good option to see the difference between these. You see this one's at 76. We're buying 1, so it's 76. I'm waiting to receive that one item, and they owe me a balance of 1. If it's a quote, I'm going to take this back to 0. And you can see when I let go, it's going to be 3 are on order as far as balance due. The value is 0. And now this is going to be reflected in whatever. You obviously would not have received a payment yet, or you're not paying it yet, I should say. And you can see what the balance would be if this is adjusted this way. If I go back to putting 2 in here and go back up to look up here and change this back to an order, you'll see how it acts. It goes back to 100, it goes back to 8370 balance, and that's what you should have. And this is the total of everything in the purchase order, balance of 8370. I hope you're catching on as we're going through here. What you can do is repeat the video and go to the section where we're going through this if you do not understand exactly what's going on. Now, if you want to go to the individual row portal, why would you do that? Well, if you go to the row portal and say, for example, you want to take this out of your PO, what you do is you click on the delete and it would drop this item in the row. There's a good reason for doing this, so you want to do it correctly. Anytime you want to get rid of a item in a purchase order, let's go back to the purchase order. When you want to get rid of a row, it's going to affect the calculation up here at the top. When you drop this particular record, it's going to take everything that's in here and re-extend that. If you try to do it in here, for example, and try to delete the row, it's going to cause errors because it's not going to update over here. So you always go in, if you're going to drop a row, and go into the portal and delete that row, and then it'll recalculate when you come back to this screen. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a review because it's pretty important. You'll be able to see all the information for this particular Mr. Green, for this particular PO number, by this ID for the job itself as far as what you're doing, by this vendor. This is vendor ABC Products on this date. We actually ordered 2 items. They're both ordered. One was not received as far as a quantity, so we still have a balance due that is based on the RMA of the item that's missing. You'll note that the row sum in this particular case reflects that we didn't have to charge this whole thing as far as what is actually due yet, because we're waiting for it to come back. And we wouldn't be paying the balance of what's owed until we receive all the items from this particular vendor. Okay, if you are doing an RMA, you put your RMA information up here, and that way when you come back to this work order, you'll know that there's an outstanding item if you haven't received the quantity that you're supposed to. So you need to track these items to make sure that you have all the items that you're supposed to get. Okay, if that covers everything, we're going to go to the next thing, which is the list view, and I'm going to pop over here. And now that we know we're working on item 133 or 1233, we know if we want to edit that, we can. One of the other things I want to show you, this is going to get kind of mixed up if you do finds and find records and then go back and show all. If you need to see everything back in the sequential order you need to, just go ahead and click on sort. And what it'll do is it'll sort all these by the PO number to make it a little easier to find things. And as we covered in a prior video, you can do a find or start a find and perform a find based on the PO number, the date, the vendor, and the status, or one of any part of that. If I wanted to go find 1233 and I knew what I was looking for, I could do that. Say, for example, I was on the data screen in the purchase record and I wanted to come over and find that particular record by the portal, I could do that. Or we really make it easy for you, because if you're in the actual purchase order over here in the data screen and you're looking at the actual purchase order, you can click on PO order. It'll take you right to that particular PO. So it's very mobile as far as getting around and finding the information. Okay, if you have any questions or if you need any assistance, be sure to get in touch with us if you own this product, and that is at our ontargetsolutions.biz website. Create a chat or send us an email and we'll take your questions and get right back to you, usually within 1 hour of the time we receive it. If we're not available at that time, leave a message or send us an email with your questions included in it. Okay, thank you for taking this video.